In this video, I take apart perfectly good window frames, build brand new frames out of walnut, and I try not to drop in or break some irreplaceable glass. Just over a year ago, my wife and I took a trip to Galveston, Texas, and we hit some antique shops there. At one shop, we found these really cool etched glass pieces in some pretty rough-looking frames. So we bought them and managed to drive them all the way back home to Colorado without breaking them. They're an Art Nouveau style, but that's about all I know about them. No idea how old they really are, where they came from, or who made them. They're exact copies of each other, so maybe they were mass manufactured at some point, but I haven't seen any exactly like them anywhere else. So now, over a year later, I'm finally getting around to making some new frames for them. I'm using some walnut, but the pieces I have are not as thick as I want them to be, so I'm gluing and stacking them up. I want to try to give a little space between the glass and the back panel to really try to make the etching stand out as much as possible. While those dry, I can take apart the old frames and get the glass pieces cleaned up. The frames are actually pretty solid, just a bit rough and industrial looking. They must have been hanging somewhere with these eyelets installed on them. No idea where though. Since I have no idea of the history behind them, I guess we can make up our own. Maybe they hung in a speakeasy during Prohibition. Or maybe they were windows to some beatnik coffee shop where you'd look through them and see people with round sunglasses snapping their fingers. Where do you think they came from? Has anyone ever seen this design before? This whole process made me a little nervous, but fortunately it went well, with no real pucker moments. With the frames off, I can measure the exact dimensions of the glass itself. I start with the thickness, and then get the height and width. I also check just to make sure they are both the same size. Okay, time to put these somewhere safe. Now that the glue is dry on the boards, I can get back to working on the frames, and I start with breaking down some pieces to rough size and milling them flat and square. These will be pretty simple frames. I want them to be nice and refined, but the etched glass is supposed to be the star of the show, and I don't want the frames to detract from the glass. They should be more like a supporting character in a movie, drawing attention to the main character, not chewing up the scene. In case you've never heard of them, the Razzie Awards honor the worst of cinematic failures. They're basically the opposite of the Oscars. And while there have been many winners of Worst Supporting Actor and Worst Supporting Actress since the Razzies began in 1980, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carmen Electra have the most nominations for Worst Supporting Actor and Worst Supporting Actress to date, at least according to Wikipedia. So I guess what I'm saying is that I want my frames not to be Electras or Schwarzeneggers, at least not for now. We can swing for the fences next time. There are a few gaps and cracks in the boards that I need to fill, so I'm using some Starbond CA glue to fill those in. With a little accelerator spray, it cures instantly, and I can move on with the project. And speaking of moving on, now to start on the back panels, so that they can have some time to dry. These are just 1/4 inch thick pieces of plywood that I'm staining black. Again, just wanting to keep it simple so the etchings are the star, but the stain will let just a little wood grain be visible. Okay, back to the frames. Now I start laying out and cutting a couple of key parts. The first is the dado, or groove that will trap the glass in the frames. I use a thin piece of ply as a test piece because it's almost the same thickness as my glass, so if it fits, the glass should fit too. Next, I need a rabbet on the inside of the frame pieces to hold the back panel. With those taken care of, I add a little 45-degree chamfer to the inside edge of the frame. Just small details to draw the attention back to the glass etchings. Some initial sanding with the first couple of grits, 80 and 120. I'll do the final sanding later, just before putting these together. And now to cut these to length. I'll be putting them together with 45-degree mitered joints. Keeping the rails and stiles the same length is key to getting a nice, tight miter that's perfectly square. Now it's time for a dry fit to make sure things will sit just like I want before permanently gluing it all up. Once these glass panels are set, that's pretty much it. There are, of course, other ways to set the glass in so it can be replaced if it breaks, but that never seemed necessary to me for this project, since I don't know of any way to replace these exact pieces if they do break. So I don't mind trapping these pieces in the frame. I just can't break them. Ever. The dress rehearsal went pretty well, so I move on to the final sanding on all the pieces and apply some finish. I sand with the final 2 grits, 180 and 220. I'm using Robio Monocoat's Pure Finish. I'm just careful not to get any on the mitered ends where I'll be gluing these together. Sanding and finishing now will be a lot easier and safer away from the glass. Okay, it's showtime. Just 4 simple points to glue up. No big deal. No pressure. This is what we practice for. And I think it went pretty well. The miters look nice and the glass is still intact. Just checking for square by measuring from corner to corner. Probably should have done this after the dry fit, but oh well. So as nice as these mitered corners look, there is a problem with them. They're weak. Relatively weak anyway. Since they're glued up end grain to end grain, they could eventually separate with seasonal wood expansion and contraction. So to combat that, I'm going to reinforce them with some plugs in the back of the frames that will straddle the miter where the two pieces meet. I'm cutting these out of some 3/4 walnut veneer plywood I had left over from other projects. Splines in the corners of the frames are also an option, but frankly, the thought of trying to run these frames through a table saw or router with a glass trapped in there terrifies me, and this seemed like the safest option. With that sorted, I finished the back panels with a clear water-based polyacrylic and cut them down to final size. Now I can drill a few holes and screw in some, well, screws to hold the panels in place. And that just about wraps this project up. Just one small problem. I didn't give myself enough room on the edges of the rabbet for the panel to actually put in screws, and ended up with a few visible screw holes on the inside of the frames. Move over, Schwarzenegger and Electra, here I come. But that's okay, everything's fixable. I made a few walnut plugs and glued them in, then finished them off with a little flush trim saw. Now to use these little pointy window letting thingies. I have just enough space at the back of the frame to nail these into and keep the back panels secure. Then to add the final hanging hardware. I got some heavy-duty rings and drywall hooks for these. Each hook is rated for 100 pounds, so 2 per frame should be enough. Okay, it's time to get them up on the wall.